Radio Hope, that is what I will be transitioning this YouTube channel onto because I've been marinating on what exactly do I want to encompass in this channel. What exactly do I want to provide? I'm no Aaron, so I'm not going to give you breaking news. That's very, very draining because things are happening that are unprecedented, which means that there will be actions that will be illegal or unconstitutional in a constitutional republic. However, there will not be any consequences to it. And knowing that, I know that I have no control over making every single thing just. In that reality, the best thing to do is to keep you sane, to clarify things so that we can digest what is occurring, so we can digest what it means, and so we can digest what solutions we have or what it requires in order to resist, right? But to resist in a way where we are in a legal pathway towards resistance, that doesn't mean that we don't get in trouble, but it means we get in good trouble for things that are not capable of being depicted as being something that is what traditionally terrorism, right? I'm not here to judge anyone, but here I want you to be safe. In that reality, I think that being capable of dissecting what is occurring and understanding those anxieties and understanding what it truly means and what is capable of happening, particularly coming from my 2 degrees backgrounds in my professional background, it really helps to connect the dots of both my BA political science international relations and then also my master's, which is international law. And that helps us because ultimately people, particularly on the right, believe that Article 6 supremacy clause only means that the Constitution means that the federal authority is above the state authority, which is a part of it. However, we're going to go into that in this podcast. However, ultimately, what it means through an international law channel, which is what the United States government has positioned and legal theory, is that the United States of America ratifies treaties. However, the main jurisdiction is in the United States. Why? Because of Article 6 supremacy clause, because Federalist 78 through 83 tells us that the Constitution is at the top of the hierarchy. It is above criminal law, it is above civil law, it is above the judiciary, it is above the executive, it is above the legislative, it is above democracy. It is the quote unquote king. We don't have a king, but if there was a king, it would be our social contract. That's the point. It is the contract that we, the people, and the government have committed to upholding, yet the government is failing to uphold that. And that is a crisis. And don't let people tell you otherwise, because the progressives, the political analysts, the legal scholars keep saying we're maybe going into a constitutional crisis. No, we've been inside of it. They just don't want to give you any panic. But I'm here telling you the truth because you deserve not to be lied to. So I wanted to do this in a way that will be impactful. And being someone who loves history, I think back to the fact that honestly, the Jews would turn on the radio and that would bring them hope. That would give them information. That would give them clarity. And I thought, what better way to have a podcast than to have an informative talk show that truly gives a daily digest of just, doesn't necessarily have to be things that happen that day, but just to kind of help you heal through the day every day, right? And hopefully I can post every day, but that's kind of the gist of it, to where I want this to exist as a transcript of what occurred and what an American was thinking as this was occurring and what this means for us, but how other countries can actually negate coming to the pathway in which the United States has, which is unfortunate because we, as a country, we're really privileged. We had it all, and then we chose tyranny. We chose to allow Russia to successfully import a coup into the United States of America. So there was lots of failures on that end, and plenty of that is comfort. It is our political leaders, our Congress, not seeing themselves as defenders of the Constitution, but only lawmakers. When in other countries, the Congress, the parliament, has a very defensive position to play in defending the people. But in our America, the lawmakers only think that their job is to legislate and not to fight. and that is why they're useless now. But I hope that is a very quick intro. I had written it down, but my ADHD want to get that out of it in order for us to get the gist of what this is. This will be the first episode of Radio Hope. That's what I decided to call it because I figure we all need some hope, and hopefully this can further guide and ultimately encompass the values and principles of our Constitution, making that clear in order for us to truly transform our political decision making. Because ultimately, what you believe is your role in politics is how you're going to vote at the ballot. If you believe that you should be voting based on your own individual interests, which is the historical push from our politicians, which is untrue to the fact that even in our preamble, it talks about the collective good. The fact that we zero into the individual liberties isn't necessarily bad, but to prioritize your individual liberty when even the equal protection clause positions that you can only restrict rights if it is a substantial damage to the rights of others, which you being uncomfortable with the existence of, say, same-sex marriage isn't a violation of your rights. So the fact that conservatives keep trying to push freedom of conscience that isn't actually real within our social contract, it tells us that a lot of what is wrong is in the Constitution. It is a misinterpretation from politicians, whether that's because they intentionally want to or because it was inherited through other political leaders. It tells us that our political government is misaligned, not entirely, but ultimately when it comes to execution to our constitutional social contract, and they actively keep it ambiguous so that it's impossible to actually enforce it. And this is why a lot of the Constitution checks and balances is based on honor code, right? That the executive should be doing what it needs to be doing, that the court shouldn't go past its authority, that the Congress shouldn't go past its authority. But when it happens, what happens then? We know through slavery that that outcome was the Civil War. If the courts aren't willing to actually push and maximize their powers, then that's what it's going to come down to. But ultimately, if the people that the courts have to rely on already compromised, you can't really blame the courts because ultimately the enforcement is through the executive, and we don't have enough people who are patriots, which we know because literal attorneys who took an oath to support the Constitution are choosing the executive, are choosing their jobs against the Constitution. It tells us that not everyone in our experience in the United States actually cares about defending a contract, because contracts can be replaced. They're in business. They replace contracts all the time. So they don't see our social contract as something that is forever. They see it as something that can be changed and something that they want to be changed. All of these tech bros want it to be changed because they fantasize about Caesar, right? The Roman Empire. They fantasize about an emperor, a dictator. And this is the thing, because in the past, when it came to the creation of the atomic bombs, and even a narrative that was in the thousands was like, are all of these scientists who are creating this maximum potential weaponry for military, are they producing evil or are they producing good? Because they're just producing things because they can, and that's their skill set, right? But what about these tech bros? These tech bros have a skill set in order to maximize their profit at the cost of other people, at the exploitation of the users. That's what Meta did, right? That's why they changed their name from Facebook to Meta, because they didn't want you to remember the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal. But everyone remembers. The unfortunate thing is that the Democratic Party should have learned. Facebook wanted to be forgotten. They wanted the scandal to be forgotten, right? So they changed their name. But the thing is that product creation, product innovation attracts people. It gets you consumers, but it is social innovation that actually keeps them. You know, that's what brings loyal customers to your brand, because they want to continue that relationship that you created with them. Now, the problem is that business are telling us, and particularly tech, like Amazon, like Meta, like X, like Tesla, they're telling us that they are maximizing their role as citizens under the Citizens United, right, in order to subvert the role of the people in democracy. Because if corporations are also people, they can decide against a democratic rule, right? And that's the role that they took on in this past election. That's why they're siding with the one who's subverted the Constitution, right? Because they don't care about the Constitution. Contracts change. They care about maximizing their profit, even if that's at the cost of you. And that's what we have to realize when we actually engage with his platforms, with Meta, with Facebook, with Instagram. It's that we are actively contributing to the downfall of our country because we have a comfort and a brand, and we have a dependency because that's where you know people from high school. That's where you have in contact with XYZ. And we have to eventually get to a point where we have to make choices. And depending on your skill set, maybe that choice is building up another platform, because Mark built up Facebook when he was in college. I'm sure there's smarter people in the United States who are capable of building up grassroots social media platforms that can be retaken, kind of like Blue Sky. Blue Sky is a great platform, but we continuously need to innovate as grassroots, because I think there's Americans who have that potential, but they're waiting to get hired. And do it first, you'll get hired later. That's what Mark did. But that's the thing, that American innovation is at a halt because there's so many talent paying off student debt, but right now we're at a crossroad where we have to maximize on our skill sets to help our country. And that's only going to be and replacing the channels that have already become toxic, whether that's Amazon, whether that's Facebook, whether that's Instagram, whether that's X, which there's already an alternative to X, that is Blue Sky. But we need to truly unite in a common defense on a grassroots level against this tyrant government. And that comes from the clarity of our constitutional social contract, our values, our principles, what I call our moral North Star, which isn't the Bible, under Article 6 Supremacy Clause, that assures that the Constitution, the social contract, is the main driver of our political decision making. And the fact that this has not been told to you, it's unfortunate, but you have to ask yourself why. Because it's beneficial for you to not know political values when it comes to the Constitution, because then you will question both parties. And that's what I do. I vote Democrat. I lean Democrat. I'm a progressive. I got out of the Democratic Party after the swear-in because I was disappointed with how spineless they are. However, ultimately, no matter how much I criticize the Democratic Party, no matter how I feel betrayed by the centrists, I cannot negate that it is the only vehicle right now that we have to fight against this. And the fact that we do need a new party is something that is true. However, we have to simultaneously create that new party that we see, as we also use the Democratic Party and hopefully take it over in order to produce it to a progressive party, right? Because it's our only vehicle right now, and I will not negate that. And I know people don't like me saying that, but it's like, okay, you feel betrayed by the party. So what do? Create a new party? Okay, but how fast does it take to create a party that is viable in order to be voted on in all 50 states? It's not that quick. It's not that fast. Now, we can't criticize why, but unless those rules and regulations change, then it's just theory. And that's what I call things that are wishful thinking, because it's like we can theorize about it, but unless there's rules and regulations that actually allow it, then we aren't actually making progress. And that's what I want our focus here to be. The fact that we are in front of a brick wall, right? But we can either just stand there and just be like, we're in a brick wall. It sucks. There's nothing I can do. Or you can just walk and walk and walk and hopefully find a way out. If it's not too tall, maybe jump over it. We need to innovate a way out of this, right? And hopefully that clarity of knowledge, transparency through knowledge, helps you as much as it helps me, and becoming a better citizen, becoming a better American, and ensuring that this never happens again. Because that is the most important thing. And that is what I hope for this to be. And if anything, a guidebook, a handbook for Americans for better political decision making, and for people who are not Americans, for you to know what not to do and what to keep an eye on when it comes to your own government, to ensure that you have a much more prepared government. Because our opposition party, I'm not going to say it was caught off guard. I think it would just got too comfortable in the status quo, that it forgot that it should be defending the people's interest, the Constitution, and not the political status quo. I don't think Chuck Schumer realizes that there is a difference between the political status quo, which is what he loves, and the constitutional status quo. But there is so much ambiguity in our social contract that you cannot really say, oh, well, he's not doing his job, because if his job is just to legislate, which is what the Constitution says, then Can we truly blame them for not fighting tooth and nail for the Constitution? Yes, we can, but unless the Constitution says it, then ultimately it is a civic criticism, right? And that's on purpose. That's on purpose because our politicians, again, when our Constitution was being created, those who were in the political roles were volunteers. They were volunteers because they had the money to be volunteers. So they had the capacity to be the intellects who got to dictate where our country went. And in that, they didn't trust that the people knew enough and ensured that the people didn't know enough about civics to create a electorate which can be manipulated through propaganda and through the use of ads. If you can be manipulated in ads for a candidate that has no viability, then that says that the whole ad was based on storytelling, not based on a political campaign, because political campaigns should be focused on truth, on things that you can actually achieve. Giving free IVF is not something that is achievable, yet people believe it because we're so gullible. It's ridiculous. But I went out of what was I supposed to say because my ADHD, I'm sorry. But I wrote an entire speech for this episode, so I'm just gonna read it because why else would I have written it? Although, like, I free Rod like 17 minutes of it, but I hope you remain for the actual speech that was supposed to be said for my intro. Let's go. So, Radio Hope, your daily drop of bullshit clarity, political digest, and objective hope to keep you from giving up on our constitutional republic. Beautiful, right? Hi, Sengael here. Have finally settled on a format for this channel, a podcast. People say they'll love to have my voice in their pocket as they're busy around, so figured an informative talk show setting can help us unpack anxieties and innovate solutions through a transparency and knowledge that can serve as influence for each of us to resist within paths we're comfortable doing so. Learning, unlearning, and relearning US politics is the premise to hopefully embody a new knowledge where you become a catalyst for guarding our Constitution from the hands of tyrants. Now, again, if you look at the Citizens Almanac, which you can get from the UCSIC, I think that's Citizenship and Immigration. I'm pretty sure my ADHD got the letters wrong. But on page 5, it talks about the duties, the responsibilities of a citizen. And the main one is to defend the Constitution. So we weren't doing that if you voted for Donald Trump. Now you can learn from that and hopefully become better. But if you continue to be a Trump supporter, unapologetically, you are actively working against this country, actively working against America. This isn't a breaking news channel because today's times are so unprecedented that it would be depressing to list news where the outcome is nothing. Will it stop? No. We're experiencing this constitutional coup and just vocalizing every single thing that isn't going to be solved or have justice. I think that creates depression. We're going to digest it here. Now, what is a constitutional coup? A constitutional coup is ultimately what is occurring, right? Because what we saw is first a congressional coup, a legislative coup, which is the Senate refusing to impeach him for subverting the Constitution, for his insurrection, for interfering in the election in 2021, right? They refused to do that, which means they went against their oath. They found a technicality. He's not technically president. So they did that. And we know that that energy is still there because this very same Congress that has some few different people still are kissing the ring rather than kissing the Constitution, right? So now, reality, we know that the Congress is compromised. We don't have an opposition party because the Democratic Party as a collective loves to uphold the political status quo. They don't benefit from changing that. When it comes to the Electoral College, Democrats benefit from the Electoral College too because it promotes that there's only two parties that are capable of making it to the end. That is going to be the most popular parties, which is what's supposed to be just one conservative party and one progressive party. So all other parties are seen as non-viable, so people don't pay attention to them. So now, reality, it's beneficial for the Democratic Party to keep the Electoral College, and because of that, we see individual Democrats wanting to remove the Electoral College, but we don't see the party actually taking it seriously. And that's what we see. A two-party system that maintains the status quo because it benefits from it. The Republicans fuck up and the Democrats fundraise from it. It works. The constitutional coup is that, and then the courts went ahead and gave him immunity, but they also, instead of saying, hey, anyone who subverted the Constitution and actually interfered in an election cannot even be on the ballot, they said, well, they can be on the ballot. They're disqualified, but they're going to be on the ballot. It doesn't make sense, but the courts have a lot of room because Article 3 is very incomplete to create their own interpretations against the actual interpretations. This is originalism versus constitutionalism, right? And so they have a way to subvert the constitutional reasonings because of judicial immunity, which means that you cannot hold them accountable. Basically, you can in a way, but it's not going to be held accountable. And then also, American justice is based on obedience to superior orders. If the court says that Brock Turner had a good future, so he shouldn't get more than 3 months, then that's what's going to happen, and no one's going to disagree with it because that's superior orders. So even if that superior orders is wrong, people don't question it because that's what it is. And that's the unfortunate thing, that we don't actually have checks and balances. We just have honor codes of people and branches hoping that the other branch does their job. And when they don't, they can challenge it. But ultimately, there is enough room to reduce that challenging and to make it irrelevant. So a constitutional coup is truly taking advantage of the shortcomings or ambiguities of a constitution in order to reshape that, in order to create it into a constitution that it wasn't. And that's what we're having, an executive who is creating laws through an executive order. And the fact that we have actual professionals saying we're not in a constitutional crisis yet is why I criticized Jamie Raskin. He's a whole ass constitutional attorney, and I was calling a constitutional crisis way before he did. And that's because ultimately he is an attorney. And that means that obedience to superior orders, right? You're depending on the courts for your interpretations because you don't have the guts to go against the legal status quo. So in a constitutional coup, we don't have any actual defenders in the government. We have people who are compromised. We have branches who are compromised, and there's no way to fix that. That is the constitutional crisis. But in this podcast, rather, I will title each episode with a date, a true challenge for my ADHD to transcribe into historical record a non-redacted narrative of what went wrong, what solutions there are, and the modern experience of Americans having to navigate resisting against a rogue military powerhouse who has successfully transformed civilian police departments into terror squads of impunity. Because that's what the police have, impunity. That's why he did the whole death penalty for people who harm cops, because he wants the cops to be his little militia. And they will be. The majority of them will be, because they aren't military members who have an oath to the Constitution. They have an oath to the orders they are given. Even if that's illegal, and they've been groomed to think that they're hot shit. So that's how they walk, right? But ultimately, the hope is that these daily digests of alternating political themes can bring you sanity, clarity, and empowerment. And hopefully some distraction from what's happening. I got into an accident some months ago. A car accident. Truck ran a red light, totaled my car. My eyeglasses flew out. Blurry is all I saw. But I knew the intersection. If I allowed my shock to turn the wheel too much to the right, oncoming traffic. Not good. Too straight? A light post. Heavy duty. No. Would have been injured. A little to the left, the back of the crashed truck. Or cement bus stop, which wouldn't have been good for me. Injury was inevitable. I went against fate and trusted resolve. I turned the wheel all the way to the left. Donut stopped mid crosswalk or intersection. I was blindish, but I didn't hit anything. In fact, apart from a scratch, broken glasses, and a totaled car, and the crash fake, I was fine for how severe it was. Had I accepted my fate, it could have been worse, but I made a choice contrary to that. Had I accepted my fate and I allowed my what I thought was my clarity to guide me, I wouldn't be here. But I went against that because I knew that I had a choice, and I made that choice. Chuck Schumer had a choice, and he chose fear. He chose to go against the benefit of the people and for what would protect him and the status quo. See, that is the issue, that we all have a choice, and allowing for Congress people to have a choice of cowardice, that is going to bite us in the butt, and it keeps biting us in the butt every single day. How are we surprised that Chuck Schumer bent the knee when we allow for Democrats to keep bending it? Because they tell us we have a plan, and they never tell us the plan, but we keep upholding they have a plan. They don't. Because if they had a plan, we would still have democracy. We would still have a functioning constitution, but we don't. It is in the clarity of our choices and the problem that we can reclaim a tragedy to ensure this never happens again. That understanding starts here. Radio Hope, your daily companion to surviving the American coup. If you're not here from my channel, I'm Sengai Out on TikTok. Visiting my content there will give more context, background, but here we will focus on rebuilding through the elimination of propaganda, using critical thinking and constitutional reasoning to arm you with the tools to resist alternative facts. I have 2 degrees, a bachelor's in political science and international relations, as I mentioned before, from the University of California. I won't say the exact one, just to not zero me in. Safety measures, and I received a master's in international law from the University of London, the School of Oriental and African Studies. Now, that's in the United Kingdom, so I'm not really worried about people zeroing me in on that. But I lived in Europe for nearly 3 years. My specializations are conflict, peace, and security, so post-conflict reconciliation, if you want to say. And a further specialization in American constitutionalism. My graduate school thesis was literally a critique of transitional models in international law, enhancing psychosocial recovery in post-conflict societies. Just to give you an idea of the type of non-traditional scholar that I am in regards to being really critical of how traditional law hinders solving conflict because it actually prolongs it, and we're seeing that in real time. The fact that my dissertation has been proven right by my own experience in American politics years later is very fascinating as someone who thought I was going to fail that thesis because ultimately it was a legal program, not a JD, but it was a legal program. So it was basically a psychosocial legal lens to the narrative, and I got a distinction, which is honors in it. So I'm very happy for that. But ultimately, that is what guides my adaptations of my takes is an understanding of the American level, but also the international level, and what the United States has argued in order for us to be capable of basically having immunity from international justice. So I don't have the authority to change that, which is why it's important to understand it. Because if the United States government says that they don't have the authority to challenge the US Constitution and allow for international communities to actually prosecute Americans, then how can the executive itself change the role of how lawmaking is made? He cannot. But the fact that we allowed for someone who violated his oath to take the oath again and expect him to actually support it, that doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't make sense to me. And it goes to show that there was a legislative, there was a judicial coup that actually allowed for this to happen. And the fact that we don't accept that. Now, that's why we continue in this reality where we don't know what to do. Because with the Pete Drunk guy, people are like, hey, Pam Bondi should investigate. Do you think she's going to investigate him? She's not. She's not. And that's the thing, because we continue to think it's traditional. We're like, he needs to step down. He needs to get fired. You think they're going to do that? If anything, if they do that, it's going to be because of the pressure from the bottom, but it's not going to be because they think it's bad, right? And that's the thing, that we have to process and digest through all of this so that we stop waiting at empty wells, because a lot of us are waiting at empty wells. We're like, hey, impeach him. Okay, and then JD comes along, then Mike Johnson comes along. It's the same thing. And I'm not saying we're helpless, but I'm saying that we have to stop looking at empty wells, right? So these backgrounds are important. This is important because conservatives ignorantly believe that constitutional supremacy, Article 6 supremacy clause, is only the federal authority superseding state rights. This is false, and Federalist 79 on judiciary proves as much, that not even federal authority, criminal law, or democracy can subvert the constitutional social contract. This is supported through a bulletproof argument the U.S. government has gaslit the United Nations into believing that U.S. ratification of treaties is subjected to only American courts and government discretion, since the international authority is not compatible to subverting constitutional authority. That's Article 6 supremacy clause, as branches have no role in giving international channels powers restricted to the United States jurisdiction. So why would the executive be capable of having authorities that is restricted to the legislative, right? We see where the crisis is coming from. The example is the 1969 International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. The United States is a party to ICER, so the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. Have you ever wondered why the United States never gets sanctioned for police brutality? It's because of this reservation. We have a reservation that includes a declaration that the provision is not self-executing, right? Which, under Article 6 supremacy clause, I'm not against, because but it requires federal and state collaboration to implement the convention. So this is where we go to HR 23 and the criminalization of states and institutions who are helping the ICC, right? Because then you cannot help against racial discrimination or discrimination of any kind of any of the treaties that we have, because then you're in alliance with them, right? Because the US government doesn't want that. But the reason that it is the state and federal government that gets dictation of how something is investigated is because of Article 6 supremacy clause. But ultimately, what Joe Biden did, and I want to be very clear, this is Joe Biden who created an allowance of subverting constitutional protections against foreign interests. So that's Israel, right? If you're gonna hurt Israel's feelings, then you shouldn't be protesting. That is Joe Biden. So Trump is taking on a very Joe Biden policy, which they would have done anyway. So I'm not very much saying it's his fault. But ultimately, no matter how liberal a Democrat is domestically, they aren't when it comes to foreign policy. And that's just how it is. We can change that, but we need to acknowledge that that's how it is. So again, why? Article 6 supremacy clause. Anything contrary to the Constitution is void, or it should be. And this is where I will leave off for the first episode. This is just an intro. We'll aim for one today here on YouTube, maybe Spotify. So we will digest anxieties through topics, but also in an effort to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Please feel free to send any questions or points to saintgael@proton.me. So SAINT.GAEL at PROTON.me. I'm gonna write it in the description as well. If you'd like for me to cover a topic or question, maybe create a Q&A section, if enough are there, or just to touch on the themes and questions throughout the episode, we'll see. But please focus on the now. Ask, how can this question or topic help us find a way out of this disaster? For instance, one I will cover is that a few viewers believe that the Constitution is fascist, which I disagree. They say that we should eliminate it, which I disagree, and I will cover that. So email can be as simple as we have to abandon the Democratic Party to create a discussion to focus on navigating uncertainties in the now. I want this to be more empowering than educational, so we'll focus more on the macro level for understanding, for moving forward, rather than that boring you with academia, right? Rather, it will be tied to the reality, since what matters is what can we do now, not to bore you with the details of politics, law, or history. I hope it can be of value in your day or in the future. I hope to see the value it builds come to fruition. But either way, I look forward to contributing to the constitutional enlightenment that will retake America to heal and recover away from the failures that enabled such a quick constitutional failure.